The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Identifying Sources of Resistance, presented by Ann Wilson. My name is Pam Christie, and I work at Peak Parent Center. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. By default, you are listening in to today's webinar using your computer speaker system. If you'd prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane of your control panel and the dial-in information will be displayed. You are connected to the webinar through the internet, and you should see your attendee interface or control panel in the upper right-hand corner of your own computer's desktop. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions in the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and Ann and I will be monitoring the questions and will address them as we go. As you leave today's webinar, you will receive an evaluation survey about the presentation. We would greatly appreciate if you would just take a moment to complete that and provide your feedback. So again, welcome to today's webinar, Identifying Sources of Resistance. It's my pleasure to introduce Ann, who will take it from here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar today. Again, my name is Ann Wilson, and I work on this ADR project with Peak Parent Center, as well as on the Shift Transition project and with the PTI. This is the final webinar in this series on improving IEP teams. The webinars present parts of the one-day training on facilitative skills, and this one focuses on identifying sources of resistance. I'm sure many of you may be experiencing webinar fatigue, so I appreciate your joining today and hope that you gain some useful information. This webinar is presented in conjunction with the Colorado Department of Education's Alternative Dispute Resolution Project. The IEP Facilitation Program was developed by CDE in response to the need for more options to prevent IEPs from moving into dispute processes and to result in better outcomes for students. The program has been going for about 3 years, and the number of people who've attended trainings on facilitative skills and the use of facilitators has been steadily increasing. In 2019, I believe there were 93 requests for statewide facilitators. The trainings that are the basis for these webinars are interactive, and so a couple of times during the webinar, I will ask for input. If you feel like you'd like to participate, please enter in the question and answer or the chat box. Okay. As we talk about sources of resistance, we'll be considering our mindset as we approach and are in IEP meetings. So initially, I'll review some information about the ADR project and facilitated IEPs. But while I'm talking about that, if any of you would like to enter some of the things that come to mind as you prepare to have an IEP meeting, what types of feelings do you have? As usual, we'll begin with some background on the ADR project and facilitated IEPs. Then today we will go over creating a mindset of change, sources of resistance, some brain science, as well as the concepts of empathy and creating a space of change. We will end with how to request a facilitator for IEP meetings, including telefacilitation. So the mission of the Facilitated IEP program is to provide tools to all stakeholders to increase collaboration and improve the IEP process. In addition to trainings held throughout the state, this webinar is a means to increase awareness of the program and the tools for collaboration. The reason for this project was that sometimes IEP meetings weren't going so well. So some of the challenges that the Facilitated IEP program helps to address include that IEP development can be a major source of conflict in special education. There's a natural imbalance of power in the process, causing parents to feel undervalued. When the team has conflict, the team can become focused on the disagreement and the relationships become strained, making it more difficult to create the best results for the child. In addition, the cost is very high in terms of dollars and human energy. So if you've been on the webinars before, you know we like this quote. We can't solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. So trying to think like Albert Einstein. The solution was the Facilitative Skills Program. The use of facilitative skills in meetings and sometimes using an impartial facilitator can make a big difference in the IEP process. Facilitation is an optional resolution process where the parties agree to have an impartial facilitator assist the team with communication and problem solving. We hope that as more team members use facilitative skills, issues can be resolved earlier and more effectively before relationships become strained and before more time and expense is needed to resolve the issues. Just a quick review of the benefits of facilitation. According to the American Bar Association, the benefits include the parties retaining control of the outcome. The process is less divisive, and so it fosters continuing relationships. And the process allows the team to deal with feelings and respects that the child is at the heart of the disagreement. The process generally yields a higher level of satisfaction, making the outcomes more durable. And finally, it is lower cost in terms of financial, but also the emotional toll and drain of attention that legal process can involve. So our goals are to resolve conflicts, facilitate solutions, have more productive meetings, resulting in improved outcomes for the students. And some questions sometimes come up about what facilitation is, or if you bring up facilitation, you may find that not everyone's familiar with it. So the really important part about facilitation is that it is impartial. The facilitator does not represent any of the parties and is not a member of the team. This is why the facilitator will contact both sides at the same time and get information from both sides. It's different from an advocate or a lawyer who would represent one party in the process. So the content of the 3 webinars in this series all work together. In webinar 1, we looked at IDEA, which relates to the structure and framework in which the IEP is developed. Webinar 2 on sources of conflict looked at the interaction in the meeting. And this webinar focuses more on the individual level, looking at factors that can contribute to resistance to what the team is working toward. So first, we'll consider some of the things that might affect your mindset about the meeting. So it looks like we don't have any comments in the chat box, but some feelings that people have expressed in the past. It can cause, there can be uncertainty, confusion, sometimes anger, sometimes people are nervous or anxious. Or you can also feel hopeful or appreciative or grateful. But there can be a mix of all these feelings, but usually emotions are present when we deal with IEP meetings. If we think back to the conflict wheel that we talked about in the last webinar, many of those factors may affect your mindset when you're approaching the meeting. If you're new to the IEP process, you may not have history with the IEP team itself, but the experience your child has had in school, whether through special education or otherwise, may also affect your mindset or contribute to what we call mind chatter. Sometimes our own experience in school also enters our thinking. So when we talk about mind chatter, we're talking about the inner dialogue of our minds, the kind of the ideas and thoughts, feelings, emotions. They may be conscious or unconscious, but those thoughts that keep entering our mind when we're trying to focus on things. Sometimes we can get stuck on particular thoughts or ideas. So IEP team members need to work diligently to avoid preconceived ideas that may interfere with an open mind. And this is a quick exercise just to think about how we can look at the same situation differently. So I'm going to show you a photo and take a moment to think about what you see that's wrong with the picture. I'll wait a minute to see if anybody wants to add anything to the question or chat box. Hopefully you can see it clearly. I see someone points out a knife right there on the table. Some other things that people have noticed. There's an iron plugged in the middle of the room. Let's see. There's a lit cigarette over there. That the over here, it looks like the trash is overflowing. So next, just take a moment, look away from the picture, think about things that you enjoy doing, things you're looking forward to doing when you are able to do more after this situation passes. And then I want you to look at the picture again and bringing your open mind and positive attitude, look at and see what you think is right. So some of the things that have come up are, I see food is provided. I see another that all the kids have clothes. Someone cares enough to iron their clothes. I know I personally don't like ironing, so you would not see that in my room. And that they're all together. So that's just an exercise to think about. Just changing our focus can change how we look at things. Keeping that idea in mind, we can think about things that everyone at an IEP meeting can do. First, we can recognize and quiet our own mind chatter. Think about this before you even enter the meeting space. Second, we can model respectful behavior. One way to think about this is to remember the golden rule: treat others as you would like to be treated, even if you think they are exhibiting poor behavior. We don't want to add to a negative situation, as that will detract from what we're trying to accomplish, which is building the best plan of supports for the child. And then finally, we can be intentional about keeping an open mind. Stay curious and work toward better understanding. Sometimes we can find common ground as we get to know everyone at the meeting better. And once we find commonalities, we often work better together. The child is a huge commonality, and generally all the people in the room are there because they want to help kids. So the more we can keep that in mind, the more we can move forward. But even as we work to quiet our own mind chatter as we enter the meeting, things can come up or happen in the meeting to stir up or cause resistance. So today we're going to focus on 4 sources of resistance: lack of information, cognitive overload, scarcity, and emotions. And if you remember from the conflict wheel, some of those directly overlap with the conflict wheel, and many of them are affected by things on the conflict wheel. Lack of information can be a source of resistance. And if you remember from the conflict wheel, we had data as one of the dynamics that can affect the meeting. In IEP meetings, lack of information may surface in a variety of ways. It could be a data or progress monitoring need. It may be that we need more data, or we need to conduct further evaluation, or maybe the data exists somewhere but it hasn't been brought to the meeting. It may be that we don't have someone who needs to be at the meeting present, And if you remember back to the first webinar, there are people that are required to attend. One of those is someone who can interpret the data. So if the right person to interpret the information isn't there, that might mean that you're missing a key member, a mandatory team member. Or sometimes someone may just be withholding information. It can be something that they're not comfortable sharing for a variety of reasons. It could be that they think it's embarrassing, or they may not think it's relevant, or if they've had an experience where they haven't been listened to, they may be worried that their ideas will be dismissed and they don't want to share them. Sometimes someone might not want to reveal something that's been told to them in confidence, or something that they don't feel is theirs to share. And there's always the possibility that we're worried about sounding uninformed, or that we don't know what's going on. So it's important to think through what's causing a lack of information in your IEP meeting, and then find the correct way to deal with it. We need a complete and accurate picture so we can figure out what we need to do differently to change the circumstances for the student moving forward. So remember to keep focused on the needs of the student and not our own needs to be right or to appear in a certain way. Some of the resources that can help prevent resistance based on lack of information. Before the meeting, we can take more time to prepare, getting information from the parties to help prepare the agenda. If we're on the school side, we can share information with the parents. And if we're parents and we haven't received information, we might ask, particularly if there's new evaluation information. It's helpful not to be surprised in a meeting. So to the extent that you can communicate about what might come up, that can help. In the meeting itself, you want to encourage sharing of ideas or brainstorming of solutions, remembering that every contribution is worthwhile, and particularly that parents are a key member of the team with equal participation rights. We want to try and suspend judgment when others share, and get as many ideas as possible out before we narrow down to develop the plan. Also, charting has been helpful. Next, we have cognitive overload. And cognitive overload happens when we're just using up too many of our cognitive resources. It's more than we can process, or more information that we can take in. It's not that we aren't able to understand, it's just at this moment, there's just too much going on. So this can be a particularly strong source of resistance. Parents may be dealing with challenging situations. Sometimes parents may have a disability themselves, or some people on the team may have experienced trauma in their history of working with others. So here are some things that can contribute to participants experiencing cognitive overload in the meeting. Again, there may be too much information presented too quickly, so we want to be mindful and try slowing down if necessary. And again, to the extent possible, if there's complicated information, let people review that before the meeting. The amount of information that is required to be processed may exceed the listener's capacity at that time. I like to think of it as bandwidth. Sometimes there's a lot going on and you just don't have any space to process another thing. Some things that can help with that are to break things down into smaller pieces. Visual aids can also help with this. A listener may be unable to integrate information with what is known. Sometimes, as parents, we may have an idea of what we think we know what's going on with our child, and sometimes we're completely surprised by information that we've heard. Or conversely, the school team might be completely surprised by information about what you're experiencing at home. Again, it's helpful not to blindside people with unexpected information, so communication is really important. Cognitive overload produces stress and anxiety, which inhibits clear thinking. So we all need to pay attention to our own level of stress and activation and try to manage it while we're in the meeting. We can recognize if we feel like we're getting worked up, maybe we can ask to take a break or be excused for a moment. Some things that can contribute to cognitive overload can include grief. If you're new to the process, it can be a big change to what you thought education would be like and what you thought your child's life would be like. If you're new to the experience of disability and the complex process of special education, it can be overwhelming. Sometimes anyone on the team may be experiencing chronic stress outside of the school situation. And oftentimes families have to deal with multiple agencies, which can be challenging and stressful. So look for ways to reduce cognitive overload in the meeting, and also consider whether there might be things that are needed outside the meeting or outside of school. We know that meaningful participation cannot be attained with overloaded participants, excuse me. So we just want to be aware of what's going on with ourselves and others on the team. The next is scarcity, and I think that ties closely with cognitive overload, because if we're experiencing scarcity, it's likely that we will also be experiencing cognitive overload, because it's particularly if those are we're dealing with a lack of resources. Scarcity can impact a meeting in a variety of ways, including what participants can bring to the table, as well as what solutions are feasible to develop. So resistance due to scarcity may be caused by lack of resources or authority to commit resources. But remember, again, from webinar 1, that a mandatory team member is a district representative who's able to commit resources. So if a situation of scarcity is a result of not having someone who can commit resources at the meeting, again, that may be a reason that you need to adjourn your meeting until you can have the necessary people present. Scarcity may also appear as a result of limitations of what the school is able to commit to provide, or possibly families are at the limits of what they can do outside of school. In the IEP meeting, the parents come and are focused on the needs of their child, while the teachers and school representatives are in a different situation as they're dealing. They may have several IEP meetings even that day or that week, and so they're trying to balance some different things from the parents. So some resources for managing scarcity are to stay focused on the needs of the child, not the wants. Rely on data to guide the discussion of needs, and make sure that the right participants are at the meeting. And it can be helpful to work towards small agreements. And finally, we have emotions. Emotions can be the biggest factor of resistance and can drive conflict forward. And emotions are probably the trickiest thing to manage. So as we remember, the work of the IEP team focuses on a child with unique needs. So if the child's in a situation that doesn't seem to be working, the IEP meeting can involve high emotions. Often, allowing a team member to express and release their emotions can actually help them to get to a place where they can manage their behavior better and continue to move forward with the rest of the team. But when that happens, it's not about thinking about whether their emotions are right or wrong, or whether they were justified or not. It's just a matter of letting them express that feeling. So if someone has a strong response, a facilitator might ask, they might say something like, "Oh, I see that got a strong reaction. Can you tell me what's behind it?" The point is to give space for those feelings to be expressed and to listen to them without becoming defensive or responding with criticism, or to correct their perceptions, even if you see it differently, because we all see things differently. And at this point, we're just trying to let those feelings be expressed so they don't come out later in more complicated ways. And we're not trying to change the perception at that moment. Because when someone on the team is experiencing strong emotions, you can't just power through. And it may be hard for a person to individually manage those emotions at that moment. So a facilitator or someone on the team may need to help a participant work through emotions. Sometimes it's hard to let go of a feeling in an IEP meeting, especially if the participant feels like they've been wronged or if something that happened in the past is being repeated. Someone might feel like they need to say that what happened was okay. It's kind of like that saying that sometimes there's something happens and you want someone to apologize, but you don't actually get that apology, but you need to keep moving forward rather than standing still and waiting for the apology. So if there's a facilitator at the meeting, they can help with the expression of the emotion. And also, if someone, I mean, none of us really probably want to have an emotional response at a meeting, but sometimes it just happens. And sometimes that can be very uncomfortable. So a facilitator can also help that person save face. And when we talk about saving face, it's helping to restore that person's feeling of dignity in the meeting. The goal is for them to overcome any negative feeling they might have about expressing emotion and helping them to refocus and move forward. There's that saying to never let them see you cry. So someone may be embarrassed if they cry at a meeting, but you can let them know that you understand and that crying actually happens at IEP meetings not all the time, but it definitely has happened, and probably most people on the team have seen it before and understand. So the more you can help that person understand that, the better. Some resources to help. Model empathy, and we'll talk more about empathy later. Provide a safe environment for the release of intense emotions. Take a break. And if you have a situation that really seems problematic, you could even call what we call a private meeting. Typically, you wouldn't need to call a private meeting, but in unusual cases, it might occur. But that's something that you would want to establish the expectation for when you're establishing your ground rules at the beginning of the meeting. And that would just be having an offline conversation with someone outside the meeting just to help them get refocused. So we know that emotions can impact meetings significantly. So next we'll look at some brain science and its role in our response to conflict or perceived conflict. Our brains can have a very powerful effect on our behavior. So let's look a little bit at brain structure to help understand how our brains may affect us when we're in an IEP meeting. This is a very simplified look at what happens to our brain during conflict, but our brains are likely to respond to conflict as a threat, causing the amygdala, which is part of the limbic system, to activate the fight, flight, or freeze response. There's a lot of varying names for that, but just the fight or flight response. When we're in an IEP meeting, we want to be accessing our prefrontal cortex in the frontal lobe, which is the area where our complex thinking takes place. So it's important not to be aware of our level of emotion so that we can continue to engage productively and not let our emotions take control. Dr. Dan Siegel is a clinical professor of psychiatry at the UCLA School of Medicine and is the founding director of the Mindful Awareness Research Center at UCLA. One of the things he's known for is making complex scientific concepts accessible and for applying brain science to aspects of parenting. He uses a hand model to create a visual for the process of how emotions rising up from the brainstem and limbic areas can override the prefrontal area. So we're going to watch a video of him explaining this hand model.
One of the most rewarding experiences for me has been to study brain science and apply it to the experience of parenting. And the hand model of the brain that I use to teach parents is very useful to understand that. So if you take your thumb and put it in the middle of your palm, put your fingers over the top, this is a very useful model of the brain. And when we can actually see in front of us what's going on in the brain, then we can change what the brain does. So let me walk you through very basically what happens in this brain and the structures in it. And it goes like this. The spinal cord comes up representing the wrist, and then you have coming up into the skull, the brain stem and the limbic area, which work together to help regulate arousal and your emotions and the way you have a fight, flight, freeze response. These are below the cortex, the limbic and brainstem areas, and the cortex is this higher part of the brain that allows us to perceive the outside world, to think and reason. And this frontmost part of the brain, right behind your forehead, so the person's oriented like this, is actually the part that regulates the subcortical, limbic, and brainstem areas. This regulation is very important because sometimes we can have all sorts of things happen in our life. We're tired, we're exhausted. Someone pushes a particular emotional button, and we can flip our lids. So rather than being tuned in and connected and balanced and flexible, we can lose all that flexibility, even lose moral reasoning, and act in ways that are terrifying to others, including our children. Now, you can actually bring yourself back online and come back to the high road and make a repair with your child. And that's important to explain to them. And you can also use this hand model of the brain to explain to children, even as young as 5 and 6, how to understand when their emotions are rising up from the brainstem and limbic areas here, and how it's overriding the prefrontal area and making it so they may be about to flip their lids. So I've had kids come tell me that they're about to go flip their lids and they need a break. They need a timeout. And by even just naming that, they can tame it. And that's the power of using the hand model for ourselves and our children to help us all make sense of what goes on in the emotional communication that we have in the course of day-to-day life.
So keep the hand model in mind, and remember that we function best when we have access to all the parts of our brain. Under stress, the prefrontal cortex doesn't work well, and we lose our problem-solving skills. When we're really stressed or upset, the prefrontal cortex shuts down and no longer works. And that's when we're at risk of flipping our lid. And we want to try and be aware of our activation level so that we don't flip our lid. Hopefully we can ask for a break or something before that happens if we feel that we're getting that upset. So when we're accessing our prefrontal cortex, we're able to make better decisions, and we are able to practice empathy better, which is our next concept. Empathy helps us to understand what others are experiencing so we can respond appropriately. It's easy to get caught up in our experience and our own perceptions and lose sight of what others may be going through. When we act without empathy in an IEP meeting, some things that may happen, critical thinking may be impaired. We may not consider all the perspectives. We can create barriers to deeper understanding of the problems, and it's possible that anger will escalate and the relationships may become strained. So how can we be more empathetic? Once again, listening is a really big part. Try to see the perspective of others and take the approach that you could be missing something. Avoid thinking about what you're going to say until the other person is speaking. I know that I get caught up in meetings. When someone's talking, I'm starting to worry about what my response is going to be, what I'm going to say. And sometimes I stop listening because I'm processing what my response is going to be. So we want to take the time to listen to their whole point. Sometimes we only hear the first few words that someone says, and maybe if we listen to the whole statement, we wouldn't feel the same way. So it can feel uncomfortable to have silence in a meeting, but even if you want to wait till someone finishes speaking and ask for a moment to respond, or say, can we take a moment to think about that? That can be more productive than responding and creating an unnecessary tension. So there's some points on here. Once again, seek first to understand, then to be understood. Focus on listening first. Remember that there could be something that you're missing, so what you're thinking could be wrong. And try not to speak in absolutes. Empathy can help build connections on the team. And so next we have another video clip. This is from a graduation address in 2012 by author Dennis Lehane. He spoke at Northeastern University's College of Professional Studies, and he gives an example from his own life and a lesson he learned from his father about distinguishing sympathy and empathy.
But my old man, much like my wife now, he couldn't fathom my road rage. It was the one thing he truly did not respect in me. And once I was driving him to work, not far from here at all, and I still remember exactly where we were. And I got angry with some guy who weaved into my lane or whatever. I don't know. I laid on the horn and I flew around him and cut him off. Maybe I even gave him the finger. I can't remember. At the next light, my father reaches over and puts the gear shift in park and says to me, "Look at him." And I look over and there's the guy cut off, but he's not looking at me. He's forgotten all about me. He's just looking off into the distance, a working man with the weight of the world on his shoulders. I will never forget the look on his face. And my father said, "Don't judge anyone until you know what kind of day they've had and what kind of life they live." On that day, my father taught me empathy, which is not the same thing as sympathy. Sympathy is easy. You have sympathy for starving children swatting at flies on the late night commercials. Sympathy is easy because it comes from a position of power. Empathy is getting down on your knees and looking someone else in the eye and realizing you could be them. And then all that separates you is luck.
So that's a nice story to think about how to think of empathy differently from sympathy, and just to be aware of how much we don't know about the people that we're interacting with and what their life is like. So again, it's easy to know when we feel misunderstood, but it's harder to know when we've made someone else feel misunderstood. And we know that empathy takes practice. It can be very awkward. It cannot go well, but you can just keep trying, and it does get better. And in every relationship, it can be challenging because it's always getting to know more about another person. So we know we need to practice it. Without practice, it can erode or be lost in a relationship. And it's helpful to practice in a situation when you don't have something at stake in the outcome, but also you can still practice it in a meeting. That's very important. But when you're not in a meeting, try and take some time talking to new people, spend some time in someone else's situation if you can. Look for ways to broaden your frame of references and be aware of your preconceptions. So we like to say that you can use the science of improving IEP teams to put the art of conflict resolution into practice. As we pay attention to what's going on in our brain, trying to quiet our mind chatter and trying to not flip our lid, and as we work to practice empathy, we also need the meetings environment to be a place where all can express their views. That concept is what facilitators refer to as a space of change. This concept is both mental and physical. It refers to balancing the power between the parties, dealing with high emotions, being sensitive to cultural issues, as well as preparing the physical environment to encourage full participation of the parties. Ground rules established at the beginning of the meeting are a big part of how we create the space of change and create that idea of psychological safety, making it sorry, I lost my train of thought. Letting everyone know that this is how we're going to carry on this meeting. We want everyone to be heard, and we want to hear all perspectives. The physical space is also important. As parents, we typically don't have control over the space, but either a facilitator or whoever's leading the meeting, we want to pay attention to the physical space. Often, IEP meetings are held in classrooms, and sometimes you'll hear stories of if you have a younger child, you know, maybe you'll be sitting in a kid chair as a parent, and some of the school team will be sitting in adult chairs, and that can create a feeling of that you're less valued on the team or something. Or sometimes you might have a table where more of the people on the school are facing you, and you know, more like you're being interviewed or something. And so there's things to be aware of in the physical space. Another thing that you'll sometimes hear stories of is maybe a parent comes in the room and all the talking stops, and whatever they were talking about, it might make you feel uncomfortable or worry that they were talking about your situation. So there's things to be aware of. And even as parents are not usually involved in setting up the room, do what you can to make yourself feel comfortable in the room and to create rapport with the team. So if you don't like the seat you've been offered, you could ask for a different seat. And remember that parents are equal participants in the process, and we want the team to feel comfortable doing the work they need to do. And we're going to talk a little bit more about cultural awareness. Research has shown that culturally and linguistically diverse families have lower levels of participation in the IEP process. This can be because of language and cultural differences, lack of understanding, as well as lack of support from the systems. Much of what we've discussed in this series of webinars relates to conflict that naturally occurs as a result of bringing together this group of people with varying perspectives. And many of the issues revolve around communication. So when there are language barriers, these issues can be more intense. Even among people all speaking the same language as their first language, there are many occasions when the person speaking thinks they've communicated one thing and the other person has interpreted another way. So it's important that the IEP team members understand the culture of the student and their family, and it's also important that families understand the culture of the school. When we talk about culture, we often think in terms of groups of people and their knowledge and beliefs, their ideals or values, and their preferences. And when we interact with various groups, we encounter a variety of cultures. So in the context of IEP meetings, we're working within a legal framework, that of IDEA, as well as the culture of the district, the culture of the school. And then each person brings their experience in the variety of cultures that they're involved with. Parents may feel less familiar with the culture of the school and the district. Along with the beliefs, customs, and values that we typically think of with cultures, there are also behaviors, the manner in which people behave and are expected to behave. And that can really vary between different types of schools and their focus, and as well as artifacts. And artifacts may be a tangible item such as handbooks, texts, or the materials in the classroom, but it also can include structures of the school, like the bell schedule, or how they approach assemblies, what kind of things they emphasize. For parents, it can be helpful to develop relationships with one or more team members before an IEP meeting, as well as becoming familiar with the school and what its culture entails. As our kids mature, we focus a lot on them developing the ability to advocate for themselves. But I found in the process as a parent that we may actually have to advocate for ourselves too in order to be able to participate as intended in IEP meetings. So speaking up is another dynamic that's strongly affected by culture. So this can be harder for some parents than others. Being aware of our own cultural background and how it can affect our participation in meetings can be very helpful. So part of creating a space of change where all can contribute is to avoid assumptions. So we want to try and come in without assumptions. Each one of us on the IEP team looks through our own lens of history and experience. So it's important to be careful not to let past experiences color or devalue what people in the room are saying. So we want to be aware of assumptions that we may bring to the table. As parents, we may have assumptions that the people on the team are experts and they know more than we do, and we may want to try to just defer to them. Or conversely, on the other side, we may feel that we know our child better than anyone and we know what works for them and what they need, and without giving credit to the fact that the people on the team see our child in a different environment and have a different perspective that can definitely add to our knowledge. So also think about how assumptions affect how you interpret actions. Sometimes people will do something in a meeting that they may have been advised to do. They might say, this is good practice, and then you do it, and the people in the meeting react negatively. I've heard, as a parent, I know there's a lot of paperwork, a lot of information that you kind of have to keep organized, and sometimes people are advised to keep a binder, and some people are advised to bring their binder to the meeting. And sometimes I've heard some comments about, teachers not liking when parents bring their binders. And so we're all trying to do what helps us to work best, similar to what we're trying to achieve for our child. Another thing is recording of meetings. Some people recommend that parents record the meetings because there's so much information that happens. And maybe the parent is approaching that more as an accommodation to help them really understand, but the school might view that as a sign of mistrust. So sometimes we just interpret things with a meaning that's not really there. So we just want to be open-minded about that as well. So all these sources of resistance and avoiding assumptions apply to everyone at the IEP meeting. You don't have to be the leader to be mindful of these things, and to help everyone in the room be mindful of these things. And keeping these things in mind can also help you be more effective in the meeting to carry out your own goals. So next, we're going to look at word choice. One of the things we talk about throughout the facilitation skills courses is being intentional in our actions and conversations with others about our children and the children that we teach and serve. We want to think and act with the needs of the child in mind, and we need to work with others in order to ensure that we develop an effective plan. So with that in mind, it's important that we think about the positive and negative power of what we choose to say, as well as how we interpret and react to what is said. Language can be filled with emotions and values. And sometimes if you're feeling annoyed or angered by something someone says, you may use language that angers or hurts or frustrates another party, whether you intend to or not. A person who receives what we call a loaded message might become defensive, and they may respond with an equally loaded message, which can escalate things rather than keep them moving forward. So we want to try to use neutral language, avoiding toxic language or red flag words. Red flag words can be some of those absolute words like absolute, never, must, or we can only do this. Also, as a tool for a facilitator or anyone in the meeting, if we pay attention to the language that people are using, we can see signals that someone on the team might be getting more stressed and more defensive. So it can be a good way to identify if the team or someone on the team needs a break. So two very important skills come out of the power of words is that we each need to choose our own language carefully. And we also want to know how to help others manage loaded language by converting it to a more neutral statement. Also, we can just extend the most generous interpretation to what's being said, keeping in mind that everyone on the team wants to support the child in the best way possible. So again, this parallels a little bit with reframing we talked about in the last webinar. The goal of shifting from negative to neutral is not to create a false positive environment. The goal is to work through the underlying issues. And as with reframing, we want to give the team something that they can work with. So moving from negative to neutral can come up either in reframing someone else's words. A parent might say, you always take away Johnny's recess for when he acts out. You never give him good options to use his energy. And someone at the table might reframe that saying, you're concerned that there don't seem to be productive ways to reinforce the behavior we'd like to see in John. And then you could move on to talk about productive ways to reinforce the positive behavior. Or if you're thinking about saying something and what you're really feeling is that, you know, Sally hates the school, she hates her teacher, she has no friends. But before you say that, you pause and think about how you could say it more neutrally. And then maybe you would say, Sally feels extremely unhappy and lonely in school right now. So we have a few word choice suggestions. And in the right situation, you know, rather than saying it's my position, you might say it's my perspective, state, share. Hopefully in the event, that one is a little harder for me to figure out when to use that. Opinions versus perceptions. This last one is the one that I've really been trying to pay attention to this since I've started working on this program. It's the yes, but, which kind of, yes, I agree, but here's how you're wrong. Changing that to yes, and. I've recently been reading some things about improv, and they say this is, yes, and is kind of a important part of improvisational action. It's the idea that you listen to what's being said, accept it fully, then extend and build on it. So the yes, and actually is a more constructive response. And I'm trying to use it more, although it's hard. I find I use the yes, but quite a bit when I start paying attention. So it's helpful to keep this quote in mind at an IEP meeting and consider how what you're doing is keeping the team moving forward and focused on the need of the child. Remember that we're all responsible for what we put into the interaction. And then in addition to language, the words we choose, we have body language. And we want to strive for symmetry so that our body language is communicating the same thing we're trying to communicate with our words. And this is trickier now that we're dealing with video conferences because you do lose some of the body language. But research has shown that actually 93% of communication is nonverbal, with 55% through body language, 38% through attitude and demeanor, and only 7% transmitted through words. I don't know much about this research, so I'm not sure what they were looking at, but that's probably shifted in our in teleconference meetings, but it's still really important to make sure you try to be consistent. Oops. And this is a quote that we like. It's just practice the pause, try and create some space between what you're feeling and how you articulate it. I'm guessing we all can come up with experiences when we spoke too soon and we regretted our statement. And sometimes when we feel really strongly about something, sometimes we just speak too quickly. So remember to practice the pause. It can help you avoid things that you'll later regret. And thinking back to webinar 2, when we talked about sources of conflict, Disagreement can be the catalyst of change. Disagreement can help us get to more creative and better results. There's a continuum, starting with tension, moving through conflict and dispute. We want to keep to the lower end of the continuum as best we can by using facilitative skills so that we can resolve things before they become more complicated, time-consuming, and expensive. We need to change our mindset and our mind chatter about conflict, remembering that conflict's not a bad thing if we keep our focus on developing an effective plan of supports and work through the issues rather than letting the conflict build so we can achieve better results. We want to keep in mind that how each one of us reacts to conflict is influenced by our personal history, our family patterns, cultural norms, the system we're working in, and the group's practices. We know that successful work groups actually know how to constructively disagree with one another. Conflict can be an indication that the group is more engaged with the process. Disagreement about ideas, which is known as cognitive conflict in working groups, has a positive impact on the quality of decisions, group member commitment, and follow through. Cognitive conflict can lead to emotional conflict, and that's when we want to try and manage it a little better because we know emotion can fuel conflict. So when the conflict becomes emotional, that's when we want to use these facilitative skills. But research has also found that groups who don't experience conflict, either cognitive or emotional, tend to be apathetic or may make decisions based on the suggestions of the leader or the group's most vocal member. We don't want apathy when making decisions about supports and services for our children, so we must all learn to work with and through conflict consistently. So once again, we have our parent input form, and again, this is a form you can use to help your thinking. You can provide it to your school if you want, but it's there in the resources for you. And again, our goal of facilitation is to keep the needs of the child and having all members of the team communicating more effectively and working together to reach more positive results. This is our facilitation continuum, and attending this webinar today is part of the green part, which is we just want to see use of facilitation skills by all IEP team members. But as conflict does occur, facilitation skills may not be enough. There is the possibility of using the facilitators through the state or also through districts. If you go to the Colorado Department of Education ADR page and you can just Google CDE ADR, it will no longer look like this. The page has been updated with COVID-19 resources. A request for telefacilitation is now there. It's kind of in a red box. And there's a lot more resources have been added, so I encourage you to take a look at the new updated page. Again, if you submit a request, they will have to get the agreement of both sides. If both sides don't agree, it can't happen. I think I froze my screen. Okay, so just to recap, resolving conflict helps the teams stay positive, improves relationships, can prevent disputes, and most importantly, improves outcomes for students with disabilities. So that's really our goal, and we hope to have more people using facilitative skills. If you have any questions, also here's a page with additional resources. If you have any questions about this webinar, please, oh, I do see a question. Please email me. It's awilson at peakparent.org. If you have questions about your specific situation, you can email parentadvisor@peakparent.org. And if you want to try facilitation or are having trouble getting the district to agree, you can talk to email Mary Ann Fleury about the specific facilitation process. And her email is right there. So back to Pam. We have just 1 minute.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne. Just a reminder, we have 4 handouts available for download in the handout window. A few of those Anne referenced, and one is of the PowerPoint. As soon as we're able to add captions to the webinar recording, we will post it to our website. To request a certificate of completion, please email me at Pam Christie, pchristy@peakparent.org. That's PCHRISTY@peakparent.org. Thank you to our wonderful presenter, Ann, and to everyone attending. As Ann mentioned, if you have any questions, please contact any parent advisor at Peak, www.peakparent.org, 719-531-9400, parent advisor at peakparent.org. Or if you have if you want additional information on facilitated IEPs, it's Mary Ann Fleury, and it's on the screen right now. Again, as you exit the webinar, please just take a moment to complete our evaluation survey, as we value your feedback. We do hope you join Peak for our next Conversations That Matter series, May 20th, 27th, and June 3rd. Check out our Facebook page for additional information. And also coming up is our Educational Surrogate Parent Workshops, June 3rd and 10th. Check Peak's website for our upcoming flyer. Thank you again, and have a great day.